Hey, hello, how you doing, lovelies? This is a little bit of a different video because I just want to get these videos out. So no intro, we're just going to get straight into the DIY of how to make the Playboy bunny cuffs for the Playboy bunny costume. So this is the fabric I'll be using. I'll be using a cotton polyester blend broadcloth fabric, and I'll be using this fabric for the cuffs and also the collar as well, which will be the next video. And the pattern of the cuffs that I'll be using is from Ariah Black as well. I'll be linking her pattern down below and also her video tutorial. So I'm placing the cuff pattern on the fabric. It's doubled, and I'll be cutting out 4 of the cuff pattern pieces. As you see, I'm cutting around it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance because with all of her patterns, it doesn't come with any seam allowance, so you can decide what seam allowance you want. So I did a 1/2 inch, and I'm making sure to transfer all the notches from the pattern onto the actual fabric pieces. As I'm cutting everything out, after I cut out all 4 pieces, I'm going to take 2 of those pieces and fuse them or interface them with fusible interfacing to get that stiffness for that cuff. And I'll do that off camera because I just wanted to do it really quickly. So now all of the cuff pieces are cut out, and I've fusible interfaced 2 of those cuffs out of the 4. And so now what I'm going to do is pair up a non-interfaced pattern piece with the interface pattern piece, and those will be our pairs. So we'll have 2 pairs of an interface piece and a non-interface piece. And then what we're going to do is place them right sides together and then pin all the way around the pattern except for where the 2 notches are on the longest part of the cuff, because we need an open space so we can flip the cuff inside out. You can also use this time to level and kind of even up the cuff pieces if you cut them like a little wonky, a little crazy like I did, because it was looking rough, okay? So once everything is pinned together except for where the notches are, I'm going to sew all the way around at a 1/2 inch with a straight stitch. So that was the easy part. I'm just kidding. Everything's easy pretty much. So once the 2 pattern pieces are sewn together, then we're just going to cut off a little bit of the seam allowance of the rounded corners of the cuffs, just to make sure when we flip them inside out, the corners can be as straight and pointy as possible. I'm sorry that I'm out of frame for this. I don't know what I was thinking. So now what I'm doing is flipping the cuffs inside out. And we'll do that for both of the cuffs, and just, take your time flipping it out just to make sure that, you kind of make sure all the corners and crevices are flipped out and are straight and nice and beautiful. So this is what it should look like once you flip the cuff inside out. So you see where we have it sewn the seam allowance down. So what we're going to do is actually take that seam allowance and raw edge and fold it into the cuff at the 1/2 inch seam allowance. And what I'm doing here is clipping that down. And I'm going to do it for both sides of the seam. And I'm going to iron it first. I decided to take the clips out afterwards because I wanted to iron the cuffs really flat first and then do this process of clipping the seam allowance, of folding the seam allowance and clipping it, ironing it, and then, sewing it. So you'll see as the process goes on. So this is what it should look like once you're done ironing everything. And so what we're going to do now is top stitch and about 1/8 inch from the edge of the cuff, maybe a little bit less. And what I'm doing here is just pinning down kind of like the loose edge of the cuff, just to make sure that nothing shifts when I'm sewing the cuff and top stitching the cuff, because you don't want it to look like uneven or anything like that. So now I'm just sewing it real quick, and then we'll get on to finishing the cuff. So this is what it should look like once you're done top stitching. It looks super professional. I know my camera's been bugging this whole video, and it's so frustrating. I'm working on my new setup, y'all, so please bear with me through this video. So now that we've top stitched everything, now it's time to pretty much assemble the cuffs. Now the rectangles, and now we're assembling the cuffs. So what I did is looked at which side was the best for me, whether it was the interface side of the cuff or the non-interface side of the cuff, and see which one looked the better. For me, it was the interface side of the cuff, only because like on the non-interface one, there was like a sewing hiccup, don't tell nobody. So I'm using the interface kind of side of the cuff as the right side. So what I did is folded my cuff in half, and now I'm just like pinning it, and I will iron that down. So now it looks like a cuff. Look at it. Also, when you're folding it down, like take your time as well, because you want to make sure that everything's lined up properly, or if it can't line up, just to make sure that what would be seen as the outside of, instead of the inside of the cuff, the outside, that kind of part of the cuff is just a little bit longer than the inside of the cuff, if that makes any sense. So now I'm just kind of like faux trying on the cuff off camera, because I don't know where my camera is all of a sudden. I just forgot how to YouTube. I don't get it. So anyway, now I'm just determining where these snaps should be on the cuff, or the closure should be on the cuff. I'm using snaps. You can use a button if you want, but I'm making like faux buttons. But like I'm just clipping it around my wrist like it should be, and then I'm showing you where the snap should go in order for it to get the look that I want. So now I'm going to place a pin exactly where that is. And then that's going to be the marker of where the snap should go. So now what I'm going to do is just measure where that placement is. So it's about 1.25 inches away from the edge of the cuff, and like literally smack dab in the middle of the cuff. So I'm folding that in half and then placing the pin so it goes vertically through both layers of the cuff. So I know exactly where to put each side of the snap for the cuff. So now these are the snap buttons that I'm using, and I'm just going to sew the snap buttons in. Now, like my camera was wilding out, so I don't get like a really good video footage of like how to sew the snaps on. As you see, it's like super blurry. Like my camera was focusing on everything else but the subject at hand, like a bad student. Like it was just wilding out. It was skipping classes, it was not taking the test, it was a mess. So if you want to see how to sew snaps onto the cuff, I recommend my Ariana Grande Sweetener tour video, because I sew snaps in that one as well for the cuffs. So that's a better video to watch. I do want to say, as I'm sewing the snaps, I don't have it here because I think I actually re-sewed these snaps. Don't tell nobody. But I not only sewed through that layer, the inside layer of the cuff, but I also sewed through the outside layer, but like the first layer of the outside layer, if that makes any sense, so that the cuffs weren't super flappy. Because the cuffs were flappy when I tried them on. I think y'all will see in a second. But it wasn't looking too hot. But anyway, I'm just figuring out where to place the other side of the snap and just sewing that on real quick. So I'm trying the cuff on, and I'm realizing, ooh, this ain't looking hot. This ain't looking what it's supposed to be looking like. So that's when I realized that I need to sew through the first layer of the outside layer of the cuff. Okay, so I realized I didn't explain what I was talking about that well, explain this side right, or explaining the sewing part right. But what I was trying to say was that I sewed, of course, on this side, right? You know, the inside of the cuff. But then I also sewed through, can y'all see that? Hold on, let me get my camera to focus for once. I also sewed through the first layer of this outside part of the cuff as well, so that it wouldn't be so flappy, but only on this inside, so you can't see it on the outer side of the cuff, so it's like invisible. I hope that explains it. And then I also realized that I needed 2 snaps instead of 1 to really get that like sharp cuff wing look. So I ended up sewing another one so that it looked more professional and looks, you know, like the way I wanted it to look. So now I'm putting on the cuff to test it on again to see where I want the faux button to be, because I don't want to do real buttons. If you did real buttons, I commend you. I don't want to do real buttons. So I'm using this black satin shank button. And what I'm going to do is make it not a button anymore. I'm going to like try to cut off the little loop for buttons, especially shank buttons in the back. It was very hard to do. But I needed a flat back so then I can glue this button to where I want it to be so it serves the look it's supposed to serve. So I'm figuring out the placement of the shank button and marking it with a pencil. And then what I'm just going to do after that, take the snap off and then hot glue it and then call it a day. And then that's it. You're done with your cuffs once you do that part. So this is the final result. The cuffs look really good. It looks very close to the original. Like, this project just like came out so freaking good, and like the cuffs look immaculate, and you can just take this tutorial on how to make the cuffs and apply it to any project that you need to use it for. And yeah, so that was just a pretty simple, easy, straightforward cuff tutorial. So just check out all the other videos that I have. I have the Playboy bunny suit DIY and the Playboy bunny ears DIY. That's pretty much it. I don't want to make this video too long. So as always, lovelies, I'll see you very, very soon. But please love yourself, and I will see you next video. Mwah!